Welcome to The Bunk, your source of fact-check information from the mainstream media to run his Facebook ramblings. And it is Christmas Day and I'm feeling slightly festive. Mostly because it's 1,000,000 degrees here, I'm sweating, and I keep my Christmas spirits in the freezer. And speaking of Christmas, this is going to be the first Christmas special here at The Bunk. And here to talk about the true meaning of Christmas is the most festive person I could find, the ever-knowledgeable Aron Ra.
Humbug!
Humbug. No, I did say Aron Ra. That kind of came out a little bit as Aron Ra, but no, I did mean Aron Ra. I do know how to say your name properly.
Oh, well, thank you very much. So you're in Australia, right?
Yes, I am. So it's Christmas Day here right now. I'm doing an orphan Christmas, so I'm just sort of sitting here.
What city?
Oh, I'm Brisbane.
You're in, very nice, Gold Coast. Is it the Gold Coast? That's what you call it, right?
No, the Gold Coast is a little bit further south. It's actually a separate city.
Okay.
But yeah, so Brisbane's a little bit further north. I know you've been here. I went and saw you at Unholy Trinity.
Yeah, I tell you what I loved about Brisbane. Brisbane has what looks like you got your tall glass buildings and you've got this beautiful beach and it looks like a fantastic resort community, and there's no one in the water.
Yeah,
because as I understand it, the waters there will kill you.
Oh, right. Funny story, actually. I actually grew up on the Gold Coast. So I grew up in Tweed, which is like a famous surfing town. We have some surfing competitions down there, so that's kind of what I grew up doing. And it was always funny. I've never encountered a shark, but I have encountered a lot of dolphins, and it was funny when you watch the tourists and the dolphins come in and they see those dorsal fins and they all panic and sort of scramble for the shore.
Yeah.
It's hilarious.
If I ever make it back to Brisbane, I want to go to. I found out about this place where you have super intensely spicy hamburgers, where they're huge hamburgers. And we have this place here here where I live that you have to sign a waiver because the hamburgers are so hot and spicy that you have to sign a waiver that you're not going to sue them for it, right? And I don't even think it's spicy at all. It is the best tasting burger that they have, and if you finish it, then they give you a free beer. And so, of course, I always get a free beer out of that.
Yeah.
But I want to do this one because I saw it in a video where there's all these metal-looking guys going, a whole group of them go into this place to get these burgers, and they're not little burgers like the ones that they serve here where I live. These are great big burgers. So it's a challenge just to eat them for the size. Right,
yep.
But then they're covered in all of this, habanero and ghost pepper and all the hottest peppers that you can imagine, yep. and it's all mixed into this horrible sauce. And none of these tough, mean-looking biker hombres were able to get through this. And then one guy said he could finish it, but it would mean a trip to the hospital. Now, I've eaten some intensely hot food before, and I want to take that challenge.
I've actually done that, and my name is in the book. I finished the burger. So now you'll have to get me up to speed here a little bit. So, because since leaving religion, you've done quite a lot of studies in anthropology and you've also taken an interest in paleontology. So could you fill me in on what you've been up to the last few years, sort of both formally and informally?
Well, yeah, most of those studies, as you put it, were as an autodidact. I spent a number of years just intensely reading in various articles that people would suggest to me, mostly scientific articles, but also comparative mythology and that sort of thing. And then I did this for, I guess about 6 years or so, where I was spending literally all my time doing this kind of reading, because I had one of those jobs where it was just where you're able to do that and there's nothing to interrupt you from doing it, and there's really nothing else to do, So that's pretty much how I got my education. And finally, I went into a college, attending initially to get like a Microsoft certification or some such thing that was popular at the time. But I walked into the wrong building. I walked into the science building, and because I didn't know the layout of the school, and I found myself in front of a fossil display. And I remember that not only did I know what all these fossils were, I knew the names of all the scientists who had discovered each one. I knew background stories and controversies behind each one. And I remember thinking, why do I know all of this and I'm not using it? So I said, screw the MCSE degree and went back for paleoscience or geoscience at the time. And so I became a student of paleontology for a couple, 3 years. I wasn't able to stay, though. There was a number of things that sort of happened all at once. You know how life happens to you in four different directions at one time, and I wasn't able to continue. The contract changed at work. The schedule changed. I was going to school I was going to work every other day and going to school every other day, so that I was like, Tuesdays and Thursdays I'd be in class, and then Sundays I'd be in tutorials, and the rest of the time I'd be at work, so I didn't have a day off. And so that's the way I lived for 3-4 years. And eventually, when they changed the contract to a Monday through Friday 9 to 5 thing, and then there was a number of other things that happened at the same time that all kind of made it impossible for me to get that degree. So I'm real upset about that.
Well, it hasn't made much of a difference. I mean, I've been watching your videos for a couple of years now, and I've learned a lot from what you've said. I mean, probably have to watch them a few more times before it really sinks in.
Well, thank you very much for that. It's frustrating because if you don't stay long enough to get the letters behind your name, then nobody takes you seriously.
Yeah.
Then you effectively don't have an education at all.
Yeah.
In a lot of people's perspective, and yet at the same time, I can send in a mail order degree or a mail order for an ordination, or there's a couple of places that'll even give me a diploma, for $100, and then you can call me doctor, even though I didn't actually do anything to earn any of it or know anything required for that.
I should just go and get a doctor of naturopathy. I mean, if you could actually stand to do the course for that long, I'd lose my mind. I'd just be in there going, no, this is not right. None of this is true.
Yeah, it's funny that some people get honorary doctorates from various colleges, and I can see where that is a huge honor, but I also see it as a slight against the people who have PhDs really do see it as a slight. So if it were to happen that anybody was going to offer me an honorary doctorate, I wonder if they would maybe consider giving me the honorary Bachelor of Science instead.
The thing about the honorary doctorates, though, is this, and I'm not saying this is what they actually do with them, they are supposed to be in recognition of something that you've actually done, rather than this is just a person we think is really cool and, is a big face. They're actually supposed to be, you've actually done enough work to earn your PhD, you just haven't gone through all the motions. So it's a little disappointing that they kind of hand them out all the time now.
No, I wasn't really disappointed until some evangelical school gave a PhD to Ken Ham of Answers in Genesis.
I actually went to the same university as Ken Ham. We got the same degree.
Really?
Well, actually...
Oh, yeah, you're in Brisbane. So where he got his first degree is where you got yours.
Yeah, well, it wasn't a university then. It was an institute, so there's a slight difference. So he went to QIT, I went to QUT. But we both got a Bachelor of Applied Science from the same place, except he did his in, I can't remember what. I did mine in chemistry. I can't remember what he did his in. Microbiology or something. He's not using it, obviously.
Yeah, and I don't understand how anybody can even get it. I mean, the core philosophy of science is everything Ken Ham thinks is opposite of reality. That's what it is. I mean, think about it. When creationism is based not just on a handful of falsehoods, but also on a whole lot of frauds, and also every logical fallacy that is on the list. Look them up on the internet somewhere, and just every logical fallacy that anybody ever lists. Notice that they have all been used as an argument for God, and conversely, every argument for God is also a logical fallacy. So frauds, falsehoods, and fallacies are the entirety of what that is all about. So, I mean, it's the absolute opposite of critical thinking. It's when you don't want to know what the truth is. That's when you come out creationist.
Yeah, well, I think with that, I mean, I've in this, even in the, I've only up, this is episode 9, and I've already come across a few cases where I've seen people that have got bachelor's degrees and PhD, and it's almost as if they're just going through the motions. They tick the right boxes, they say the right things when they need to say them, and then they come out and they say, everything we learnt is a lie, and you can heal water with energy.
Yeah, so there's that guy, I forget, Jonathan something or other. He was a Mooney once upon a time, and he was the author of Icons of Evolution. And Reverend Sung Myung Moon chose him he was going to pay for him to go through pay for his entire education to get a PhD. So you pick a guy from your random crowd of Moonies, and you say, I'm going to pay for you to go to secular universities to get a PhD, and this was the actual words that he used, to destroy Darwinism from within. So he goes to college and spends all of those years in college specifically to have the degree so that he can pretend to have accolades to destroy what he calls Darwinism, which, of course, no one who understands science calls it Darwinism, in the United States anyway. I understand that some people may refer to that in England. It's a different culture.
Yeah, I mean, but it's not Darwin. We don't worship Darwin. We don't. I mean, if anything.
Well, they have to do the false equivalency thing.
Yeah.
That in order to seem like two equal oppositions, they have to say that atheism or evolution are religions. That's the sixth foundational falsehood of creationism, by the way. In fact, it's probably the fifth as well. They have to assert that atheism is a religion because it's not a religion, and that the lack of faith constitutes faith. That a rejection of religion is a religion, and the rejection of faith is a faith, and so that they can claim that creationism is based on evidence, just like science is, and science is based on faith, just like religion is. It's all a lie, but it's a lie so that they can make it look like two sides of the same coin, which absolutely it's not. This is really a comparison of fact and fantasy, and they are all about fantasy. They don't give a shit about fact.
Exactly.
And that's what it really is. But every conversation, every one I ever have, every time I get into any kind of debate with a creationist, it's right out the gate. Well, you have faith in science, and then they project I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, and they'll say these things simultaneously. They will tell me that faith is a belief that is based on evidence, even though every source, even in Scripture, and not just Christian Scripture, but also in Hindu Scripture and Muslim Scripture, all of them admit that faith is a belief that is not based on evidence, right? It's what you believe despite evidence.
Yeah.
But they're still gonna use that wrong definition. They're still gonna reverse it and throw it at you, and then say that their faith is based on evidence. And then at the same breath, they'll turn around and say, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, because now they've switched context, because they also rely on the logical fallacy of equivocation, where they keep changing the definition in the middle, so that now they're saying that faith is a belief that is not based on evidence, what faith really is, but only when they're accusing you of that. And then they switch the definition again so that they can, again, pretend what we all know better than, that faith is a belief that is based on evidence, and everybody knows that's a lie. It's very frustrating talking to people like this, because I know that there are people who sincerely believe, because they've never examined their situation, they've never been in an argument with somebody who adequately understands both sides, the science and the religion, and maybe they just they assume that if I don't understand it, it's because there's lots of other people who are much more studied in this, and maybe they know something that I don't, and that's a fair thing to assume. So it can be that there are honest believers, but the professional creationists know better. The professional creationists know exactly when and where they're supposed to lie, on what cue, and that they know that they are lying. There's no doubt about that. Mm-hmm. And I can demonstrate that with a number of a number of the professional creationists, of names that people want to throw out. I can show you the things that they've said. I can show you where they've been corrected on those things, how they know that what they just said is not true when they said it was true. So I can prove that all of these people are in fact lying.
Well, that just makes it easy to argue with them, because street epistemology, you walk up to them, you know exactly what they're going to say.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you can never get an admission. I mean, it doesn't matter how solidly you prove when they say that there's no transitional species, or there's no beneficial mutations, or evolution is just a theory. You can correct all of these in an instant, overwhelmingly. Slam, you've got it, you're right, you've got them nailed to the wall. But they will never make the admission. They will only change the subject. They change the subject. Well, let's talk about something else. No. Before we move to something else, get your admission on this first. You'll never get that admission. They know they're lying, but they're never going to admit it, because they can't, because of the slippery slope. If they admit one thing, they're going to have to admit all these other things too, and it's all going to come down, because they know that what they believe, or rather what they make believe, is not really true. So the difference between faith and reason is whether you give a damn about the truth. That really is what it matters to, what it really was, what it boils down to.
Well, speaking of going on to a different topic, I get this back on track, because And not just because of you, because I know that I could go on about this for hours and probably get into other topics that I don't really want to get into. So bear with me for a second, because I have a couple of corrections from the last episode. Going back to the last episode, I talked about human hair transplant, and I said that there was an adhesive used in a head transplant procedure on cadavers that was novel. I said that it was to test the adhesive, but it was actually a dress rehearsal for a live transplant. I also mentioned in another story it's the same story actually, that they conducted the first successful monkey head transplant. I said the 1950s. It was actually 1970. The monkey was paralyzed and lived for 9 days. And Japanese human meat. The origin, April Fool's joke, was an article in English. A Spanish spoof site later modified the story on July 12 to appear more like the story that was currently in circulation. So see Snopes for that. Now, Aaron, do you have cats or dogs?
Both.
You have both?
Yeah.
So which do you think is smarter?
I don't think that intelligence is measured linear. Like when you do the role-playing games and you measure your strength versus your intelligence. Strength, you might be able to put a linear number on, how much do you bench press or whatever, but, you can't really do that with intelligence. There's a very distinct difference. Now, I think that dogs are more intelligent in some respects. Cats, obviously, are more, let's call it manipulative.
So I did a story last week on this because there was an article came out saying the science has definitively proven that dogs are smarter than cats. And I kind of got on the defensive of the cat side. I mean, I love both dogs and cats, but this was kind of like, yeah, we're getting down on cats. So I kind of got on the defensive about cats. But the thing was last week, when I wrote the article, the episode, come up with all the things, the article hadn't been published yet. So I was basically talking about an article that hadn't been published. Everyone was only talking about the abstract. Well, when I went to do the podcast, that day they actually published the article. So I didn't get a chance to read the article, so now I've had a chance to read that. And just a few points that I come up with from there. So first of all, a correction. I said that dogs and cats had, cats had 300,000 neurons and dogs had 500,000 neurons. It was actually million neurons, not thousand. And I was wrong about the numbers. It was 250 million for cats, 530 million for dogs. And I forgot to mention that the number of neurons was in reference to cortical neurons, not brain neurons.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I also forgot to mention that the previous study for cats was 280 million, so a little bit higher, but dogs was 160 million neurons, and now they're saying 530 million cortical neurons, which is a bit strange that that much of a discrepancy between papers was a little bit odd. Cats.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, now what were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say that a lot of people have difficulty understanding different, let's say, axes on any measurement that you put down.
Yeah.
Like with the measurement of which one is smarter, right? That's a very simple question, but the answer is going to be very complex. Like which is faster, which is more powerful. When you measure engines, for example, I mean you have horsepower and then you have torque.
Yeah.
Right. These are different measures, and so they're different axes.
Yeah.
Now, intelligence has got to have at least those two, if not probably a z-axis as well. I would imagine.
Exactly.
So that there are many different facets on intelligence, and we've got when you put a linear number on an IQ test, it's not a realistic evaluation. There are people who have a great deal of aptitude in one area and not so much in another. And there are people that have the ability to do, let's say, that they can be living calculators, that they have every function of a calculator in their brain so that they can get the math right in astronomical figures every single time. Or they have these incredible memories so that you can give them a date and they'll be able to tell you the weather on that day, from some date in history where they lived. But that doesn't mean that they have other sorts of evaluation skills or what have you. So you have to measure skills as well as aptitude in a number of different axes. And so things are a lot more complex than a lot of people want to think because we are happier thinking of things in terms of dichotomies.
Well, that goes back. So I got a quote from the full article, and this is actually from the article. And they said, any argument about their cognitive capabilities at this point will be larger a matter of opinion until direct Systematic comparisons of cognitive capacity are performed across these and other species. Moreover, given that both cats and dogs seem to obey the same neuronal scaling rules for the cerebral cortex, any difference in cognitive capabilities between them due to differences in numbers of cortical neurons will be tied to differences in resulting brain size, suggesting that cat-sized dogs, if they have cat-sized brains, might only have as many cortical neurons as domestic cats. Still, our data allows us to predict that, with their larger numbers of neurons in the cerebral cortex, dogs of the size examined here should have more complex and flexible cognition than cats. Now, I will give a caveat to that, and that is they actually gave a link. They gave a reference to another article, which I didn't have last week, where they talked about the articles where they said that there is a correlation between number of neurons and intelligence. But there was something else that they talked about in those, which they didn't mention in this article, which was a concept known as conduction velocity. So it's not just about number of neurons. Closer neurons and more neural connections can affect intelligence. So cats have a slightly higher neuronal density than dogs, which means that those synapses are closer together, so they don't have as far to communicate between neurons.
And again, I like to use an analogy that helps people understand these sorts of things. I mean, hopefully people that are my age, at least in America, will probably understand this analogy when you compare European versus American performance cars. If we're looking at intelligence, right? You look at the amount of brain matter, the amount of neurons, right? We look at the gray matter that mammals have, and so we would assume just based on that birds have got to be really stupid, but birds are not really stupid. At least some of them are quite intelligent, and the nice comparison for how they can do this with hardly any or no gray matter at all is looking at the European engines that didn't have the large cubic inch capacity. They weren't, that wasn't what they were about. They were about, the turbocharge, the fuel injection. These things were far more efficient, and carburation is not efficient. So you have to make up for that by having a huge engine. So if you have a smaller engine, but it's much more efficiently fueled and inducted, then you're going to be able to get more out of that. And that's what birds have done.
Well, they did find that they did a study recently where they found that birds have a higher neuronal density, which has a double effect of that there's more neurons in the brain, and those neurons being closer together, they're able to communicate more quickly. So
without gray matter. You see what I was talking about?
Oh, yes, of course, yeah. But the gray matter is kind of a mixture of neurons and other non-neuronal matter.
Yeah, but so many people were attributing gray matter as the source of intelligence. But if birds don't have that, then where's your explanation for why they're so smart?
Well, this is where the correlation between number of neurons and intelligence goes, but in this article, they kind of only focused on number of neurons without focusing on neuronal density and conduction velocity.
You know what I'd really like to see, and they featured this in a movie recently, the Guardians of the Galaxy. They have this super genius raccoon, right?
Yep.
Now, if you look at the way nature does things, I mean, obviously our intelligent designer obviously isn't that intelligent, because the biggest brains he gave to anything are the things that can't use those big brains. So elephants are phenomenally smart, and they have bodies that can't use those wits. Mm-hmm. Dolphins, likewise, are every bit as smart as us, but there's nothing they can do with it because they live in the water and they don't have hands. They can't manipulate objects. They can't build fire. There's certain things that dolphins are way handicapped over us. So we could be half as smart as dolphins and still produce 10 times more than they can. Now, if you were to do an intelligent designer, you would take something like a raccoon. Now, here we have something that can walk upright. It actually has hands and can manipulate objects, but it doesn't have the brain. Now, here's another thing that throws the intelligent designer off track. You have this animal that if you were to do, and these are procyonids, so they're like they're karyotypic of the basis of dogs, like what all dogs came from, dogs and bears and that sort of thing, all came from raccoons, essentially. I mean, karyotypic. So it came from something like a raccoon. So if you were to take a raccoon and derive that the way that we've done selective breeding on dogs, to come up with hundreds of different recognized species or breeds rather. If you were to do that kind of selective breeding with a raccoon, with the goal being that you're going to enhance its intelligence, and this is even without surgery, you could do selective breeding to enhance its intelligence. But the weird thing about raccoons is, why are they unchanged across Asia and North America? Because studies have shown that raccoons are resistant to evolution, believe it or not. You have some species that evolve faster than others, and raccoons have this inhibition to mutation that prevents them from changing. I mean, you basically got two species. You've got the raccoon that we all are aware of, and then we've got this other thing called the jaguarundi, I think. Or I may be confusing it with something else. I think it's the jaguarundi, or that might be a cat. But there's a South American version, and I can't remember the name of what the South American version is. It's just basically a raccoon with a longer snout. But for whatever reason, these things don't evolve. So you've got all of the aptitude physically, and you could derive a brain to go in that to match it, but you can't because it doesn't evolve.
And they don't have opposable thumbs.
I actually talked with geneticists about this. I said, "Is this possible?" And they said, "No, it's not possible, and here's why: because you can't, because they don't have the propensity for genetic diversity that you would expect that they'd have. They basically started from the procyanid, which basically their name, from the origin of all dogs and bears and such, and then they just adapted this one version that just doesn't change. It's not susceptible to the rate of mutation that other species are."
It's funny, though, they did actually find in this article that raccoons are more intelligent. They have a higher neuronal density, which is more typical of that of primates. So
yes,
they do have a high level of intelligence for their brain size.
Yes, they do.
But they don't have opposable thumbs.
We could fix that.
Oh, that's an evil laugh. I don't know what you've got going there. Like you got like some kind of breed of raccoons in your basement that have opposable thumbs that are going to overtake humanity.
Well, I've seen the Guardians of the Galaxy, and I heard Rocket the Raccoon complaining about how he was made to be that way. But I'm sure that being the super hyper genius that he is, he's still better off than being a trash panda.
That is the worst name. Raccoons are awesome. Although we don't have raccoons here. I mean, we have, I think the closest equivalent would be the bin chicken, which is the ibis.
You have the possums, which are not remotely possums, but you have what you guys call possums.
No, you guys
opossums, like the Americans have the opossums, and then you have the possums that begin with a P, and those things are adorable.
Opossums are demon cats. I call them demon cats because they look like cats that came out of hell.
Have you ever encountered an opossum in real life?
No, I haven't.
Okay, well, we have a handful of species that live in our area, and we had one fall through our ceiling once. And it's so tempting to keep them as pets because although they look like a combination of a rat and a crocodile, they're actually not. They're not aggressive. They have horrible, scary teeth, but they're really not aggressive, and they don't carry rabies. There's something about their low body temperature because they are marsupials. They are apparently resistant or immune to rabies.
Nice.
The sad thing is they carry a whole plethora of other diseases. Even though rabies is not one of them, they're not safe.
All right, well,
which is frustrating since they're not aggressive either. It would be just so tempting to just, it fell through the ceiling, and I was wondering, okay, do I put it in a pet carrier or do I just give it a bowl of food and water?
Well, I got to finish off these corrections, so just bear with me for a second. So I mentioned that cats aren't all that great with socialization stuff, but it turns out that they are. So they're able to follow human pointing cues, and they are sensitive to human mood and behave sensitively. In a test, they found that they're sensitive to human mood. And they behave sensitive to human depressive moods and engaged in more aloe rubbing of the head and flank, which is where they rub up against you, and it's a sign of affection. While cats don't seek human help in problem solving where dogs do, cats do look to human for what's called social referencing, which means that they look for appropriate reaction to an unfamiliar situation. So if they see something they're not familiar with, they kind of look to their humans to see, should I be afraid of this? Should I feel comfortable with this? So yeah, they do have some social skills, but dogs still have more social will and more.
Why is it that the cat can't figure out that if the parrot is sitting on my shoulder every day and I'm feeding him every day and petting him every day, that maybe that's not the thing you're supposed to kill?
I don't know. I've seen plenty of cats that are perfectly cool with the household birds and mice. And
my cats, they do this game where you can tell that they're doing it, where they want you to think they're not looking. They want you to think they're not looking at the bird they're really looking at. And you'll look at the bird, you'll look at the cat's looking a different direction, and then when you turn your head and then glance back, you see the cat really is looking at that bird, and it's now marching toward that bird as soon as you've turned your back.
It's possibly playful stalking behavior, but I wouldn't risk it.
Yeah, we had a cat that lived with our bird for 10 years. And I thought that the cat was completely immune or not interested in the bird at all. And then one day the cat reached into the bird's cage, and that was it.
Ah, no.
Yeah.
My cat was perfectly fine with our bird until it chewed off half of his whiskers.
Wow.
It was a cockatiel, and they do that. And
the funny thing is, I've got a large parrot, and our cats, if they get that beak one time,
yep,
that's it. And it's got talons like an eagle. So believe me, cat, this is not the thing you want to wrestle with. It really isn't.
All right, so I have a section called Hold the Onion, which is basically true, false, or satire. The satire is referring to the popular satirical paper, The Onion. So basically I come up with these headlines, and you have to tell me if you think they're true, false, or they come from a satirical website. So first up, we have some cancer-fighting substances found in okra. So apparently okra, which is a cucumber-like plant, or at least looks like it. I don't know what it tastes like. I don't know if it's related to cucumber at all, but just kind of looks like a star version of a cucumber. They found some cancer-fighting substances in okra, and this is kind of being touted in what I saw as kind of being, eat more okra, you'll cure your cancer. So how do you think that's true, false, or something from The Onion?
Okra doesn't look like a cucumber to begin with.
Ah.
Yeah, I live in the South. They sell fried okra and a lot of different things, and so it's a common dish in Southern recipes. And it's a little round, looks like a tiny cabbage.
Again, but as in regards to the cancer-fighting properties of okra,
I have no idea with okra. I've heard all kinds of things about cancer fighting, whatever, and they usually take things that aren't popular foods to assume this about, unless they're talking about marijuana. So I'm going to say false.
Yeah. Well, so I'll preface this by saying that I saw a talk recently where the person who was giving the talk was a cancer researcher, and she said that basically cancer is actually really hard to grow in a petri dish, and pretty much everything will kill cancer in a petri dish. It refuses to grow except under perfect conditions. But in regards to the article which this meme came from, it turns out that they found it's a class of chemicals called lectins, which are proteins, and they found that these lectins induced apoptosis in the cancer cells, which is promising and definitely would lead to more research, and hopefully maybe this could be something which could be useful. But being a protein, it will be broken down in your stomach. So certainly eating more okra is not going to help stave off cancer because or at least in regards to this compound which they're talking about, because it'll be broken down in the stomach and broken down to its constituent amino acids. But hopefully in the future potentially could be used as as something in a chemotherapy routine, which could enhance the effects of that.
Yeah, I remember reading it, and this was a serious thing. I was watching this thing that was talking about how there was one chemical component that is produced by the sea cucumber that has been proven to kill cancer immediately, 100% every time. The difficulty with using this as a cancer treatment is that it also kills people.
Well, this is the thing with cancer. When you die, so does the cancer.
Yeah, usually.
Okay, so there's a video of been going around of a guy who's apparently come up with a way to make engines more efficient, and oil companies hate him. They absolutely despise him because people are going to use less fuel. Okay,
is that the entirety? Am I supposed to say if that's true or false or not?
Yeah, do you think that there's a guy out there who oil companies want to take down because he's created a really cool fuel
I've heard
additive?
3 or 4 different versions of this.
So we have oil companies unhappy about this line. Oops, hang on. We have
you've accidentally turned on the porn.
Yes. Oil companies aren't happy about this. Lone
recognize that
scientist recognized by NASA, MIT, and the NSF.
Okay, so I've heard several different versions of this, all false.
Yep.
And one of them was that where the guy devises a carburetor that is so efficient that you can get 100 miles a gallon. That was the first version of that story that I had. And then there was the other one about using water, and then you've got this catalyst that separates the oxygen and the hydrogen, and then burns both and produces water as a byproduct, so that your exhaust actually shoots out water, and then you end up something equivalent to a perpetual motion machine.
Yeah.
That you literally fuel with water.
Yep.
And so, yeah, but all versions of that are false.
Yeah, there was one that I saw which is a hydrogen machine, and the way that they usually tout it is this engine runs on water, and it turns out that it's actually a hydrogen engine that uses water. So the heat from the hydrogen causes the water to expand. So it's kind of a hybrid internal combustion engine and steam engine. But it still has the problems of you need a hydrogen infrastructure. You need to get the hydrogen from somewhere, and it's not running on water. The energy is coming from the hydrogen. So, but
yeah.
In regards to this guy, I tracked. It's actually a viral marketing video for a company called Tribotex, which sells an oil additive. And I won't say what it is, but if you want to go look it up, you can, because it's pretty easy to look up. A common additive which pretty much everyone has sitting around in their household. And he did some experiments with it, and he found that if you add this to oil, the nanoparticles can coat your engine and cause like a 3 to 8% increase in engine efficiency, which is really much of a muchness. But also, why? But I want to kind of go back to a conceptual thing here. So not scientifically proven necessarily, and I can't prove this by documents, but why would an oil company, because we are now on the verge of electrical engines. We are now on the verge of renewable energy resources. So why would oil companies not want something which can make an engine more efficient?
The funny thing is that that's the part that is true. That really is the case. Now, while the guy never came up with the carburetor that people were talking about, and the water-fueled car never happened either, there were a whole lot of issues with and still are, with renewable energy, with electric engines and such. In 1988, there was an article in Popular Mechanics or Car and Driver, I don't remember which one of those, but it's one of those type of magazines, where they were talking about that there were 3 electric cars in the late 80s. One of them was American, 2 European, and they were all 3 electric engines. Now, at the time, Japanese cars were still pathetically slow. They hadn't come out with a high-performance Japanese car yet, except for the Datsun 280Z. That was the only performance car Japan had ever cranked out. But at that time, they said that all these electric cars, in 1988, all 3 of these electric cars were quicker and faster than all the Japanese imports. 0 emissions, and they had a pretty good range on them. I don't remember what it was, but there was a time in the 70s where they had electric cars that could only go 50 miles an hour for an hour, and that was it. But now you've got something that can go about 200 miles, and that actually has 300 horsepower, which is pretty good, right? So you've got real performance cars. Then instantly, all 3 of those cars are gone because they want people to remain addicted to fossil fuels so that you will keep paying for gasoline. That's all.
But now we have Tesla is basically
and look
ruling
what Tesla
them
had to go up against. Look at the
exactly,
propaganda that has been. Have you ever been online to defend Tesla on anything? And you've got all these trolls that come up and say that there's not enough lithium on the planet to generate. And as
I've
if
never
lithium
seen
batteries
this
are the only
before.
batteries available. There's a half a dozen different types of batteries that will power electric cars. They don't have to be exactly that type. You can still get. I mean, we're talking about back when we were kids, a performance car had 300 horses. Yeah. A really good, a high-performance car had 400 horses, and if you worked with it and you put a lot of money into it, you could get 500 horses out of it. But now you can get 700 or 800 horses, and it's electric, and it has instant torque.
Yep.
How can you compete with that? We could have had that from day one. The oil industry is the reason, has always been the reason, that we haven't had electric cars all this time.
I've never seen that argument that there's not enough lithium on the planet, and that is actually rather amusing because there is a ton of lithium on the planet.
It's the third item in the periodic table.
Yes, yeah, it's quite common. But you look at the oil companies now, like they're up against Tesla, and granted, Elon Musk had to come up against it a lot to get to where he is now, but he is where he is now. So
yeah, he's one of my heroes, by the way. He's
why,
like the most progressive person I can think of.
why would the oil companies, now that they're faced up against a giant like Elon Musk, not want to find basically oil based engines or petroleum based engines that are more efficient, so that
because these are people. Bear in mind, here in the United States, everybody is a fundamentalist Christian dominionist end times believer. So they don't believe we have a future. So the only thing they care about is the next fiscal quarter. How much money can they make? And they don't want to. They want to pretend that anthropogenic climate change is not real, or that it's not their fault. Maybe the climate is changing anyway, and there's nothing we can do about it. And they're saying this because they own the coal fields and the oil fields, and they're going to extract all that money. And they don't care, literally do not care what the repercussions are for anybody, including future generations.
Okay, so maybe oil companies don't have this guy, but it's a viral marketing campaign, so I remain skeptical. But
yeah, look at Donald Trump, for example. He said that he wants to put up all these oil wells across what are currently protected national parks in Alaska, for example, but he will not allow clean energy like windmills because he says they are an eyesore. But at the same time, he also made it legal for industries to dump toxic waste into public water supplies. Tell me which is the eyesore?
Yeah.
So here is somebody who wants to bring coal back, even though there is no jobs left in coal because of automation, and coal is not efficient, and it's something we need to walk away from. We need to run away from coal. But he's still beholden to the fossil fuel industry, and he is going to object every way he can to clean and renewable energy, no matter how much better it is for now and for the future.
Trump is a puppet for so many people, though.
Yep, he's easily manipulated because he's not smart.
Exactly. Typo in Bill C-45 legalizes cannibalism instead of cannabis. So apparently they're trying to legalize cannabis in Canada, and someone has accidentally legalized cannibalism.
Yeah, well, that would be an interesting contradiction in the southern states where sodomy is illegal.
So true, false, or satire?
They want to say that it's a typo, and I'm going to say that that's false.
Yeah. It's actually satire.
Okay.
It's the one I found didn't say satire, but it comes from God. Now my computer's going really slow. I think that the Beaverton is the name of the satirical paper. It's basically Canada's version of The Onion. So that one turned out to be false. Sperm Bank's perfect donor is mentally ill and he's fathered 36 kids. So apparently a donor who's fathered 36 kids has turned out to be a criminal with schizophrenia, and actually has disability for schizophrenia and has been in prison several times.
Didn't they make a movie about this guy? Yeah, I think they did. I think they made a movie about this.
Okay.
I don't think it's true though. I think it was a false story to begin with, but it was a false story that made a movie because that happens a lot.
Well, what I have is it's actually true.
Oh.
So hang on, I've lost the links here, but basically, I have the lawsuit here. Well, what is claimed to be the lawsuit anyway? I couldn't I couldn't source this from the USDC myself because I had to pay for it. So if anyone wants to see more in-depth journalism, Patreon, stick around to the end. I'll tell you how. But I have from another site, from courthousenews.com, a supposed copy of the lawsuit where they talk about Zytex, and basically the customers of Zytex believed that they had strict screening routines, but apparently they didn't bother to do a medical background check on this guy because he had actually been diagnosed with schizophrenia with grand delusions. He wasn't on disability at the time, But he still had the diagnosis, and he had been to prison for various things. I think it was one of those things where was petty things, and he just did enough of them that they just sort of said, okay, we're now going to class this as a felony, you're going to prison.
Okay.
So there's a class, I don't know if it's a class action lawsuit or several lawsuits against this guy, but it's probably been made up previously, but it was hypothetical, but this has actually happened, and it was granted. So there was two aspects to the lawsuit. The plaintiffs sued for liability, breaches of warranties, and battery, and then the defendant
breaches of warranty.
Yeah, the warranty of this is against Zytex, not the individual. This was Zytex, okay. So they obviously gave a warranty that the warranty would have been this person is in good health. This person doesn't have any history of mental conditions, and the battery is because of conditional consent. And the condition for consent wasn't met, so therefore it's battery. And then the other part of the case was the claim for intentional and negligent. Oh, hang on, no, that was why they didn't. So basically, the plaintiff tried to say that it wasn't their fault, and that was denied. So granted in part of the plaintiff and denied in part of the defendant. So yeah, so that one is true. And human meat found in McDonald's meat factory. McDonald's has been found to contain human meat.
I don't know how that would happen. I've seen all kinds of horrible things found in McDonald's. I mean, like the chicken head somehow fried with the batter on it, and also rats. Mm-hmm. But I'm not gonna buy human meat.
Yeah. No, this has been spread around as some kind of factual thing, but it initially came from a website called Hustlers, which is not only a satirical site, but it's a custom satirical site. So I'm guessing you just put in a few keywords that you want in, and they'll print out any article that you want. Okay, so finally we get on to the main story. So we're going to talk about the origins of Christmas and Christmas traditions, because this is Christmas and it's a Christmas show. So first of all, everyone's getting up in arms about Xmas. So what's the deal with Xmas, which is not really Xmas? You're not supposed to pronounce it that way.
Yeah. Well, I think it started out as a representation of the cross, or just Christmas because it was an abbreviation. And I remember asking my mother when I was like 8 years old why some people said Xmas, and her excuse was that they were afraid to write the word Christ. And somehow or other, I couldn't buy that. I mean, I couldn't believe that anybody would be. If you don't believe in Christ, then why would you be afraid of him? Mm-hmm. That didn't make any sense. So I knew that was bogus. But on the origin of Christmas, I mean, we know that the story of Jesus. Now, of course, I don't believe that there was a Jesus at all. Mm-hmm. I believe that this is a story that is based on a combination of different people. That there are elements of the story that are actually belong to different people that were sort of like all attached into a single character. And some of those characters, at least most of those characters, are mythical. So if there was a historic person at all, there wasn't just one of them. There was a handful of different people that if you brought them back forward in time, they would not. You could show them all the movies about Jesus today, and they wouldn't recognize themselves as that character. They wouldn't, because the life story, some of the tales about them, the loaves and fishes, the cursing the fig tree, the moving to Egypt, the census of Quirinus, all of these things were different tales attributed to different people. And if you brought your three primary Jesuses, one of them might remember this story as pertaining to him, another one might remember another. None of them would remember the crucifixion, because the crucifixion was attributed to another guy that happened 100 years later, and it was just like retroactively written into the scriptures, something like that. This is the way I believe the Christian story began. And I believe it began with a pre-Christian Christ-like character who was in the first century BC. Though I can't remember what that guy's name was. But, you have all of these cumulative legends that sort of like ended up being historized later on. This is what I think happen anyway.
Well, that goes back to Mithra and the Persian Mithra and a few other. Are you aware of any of the other?
Yeah, but
mythologies?
Mithras is not the character. I'm talking about a guy that was supposed to have been just a guy. Who was supposed to have been a prophet, was supposed to have had a cult following, very similar to John the Baptist. And John the Baptist is another pre-Christian Christ character. So, I mean, in the story of John the Baptist, you already have the Jesus character established, but then they want to enhance that. They want to create the new sequel of it. So they have this other story where John the Baptist baptizes Jesus and then takes his already has an audience for him, and he appropriates that audience to Jesus, in a literary sense. So he says this guy is the true Messiah, because people were believing that of John the Baptist once upon a time. So they appropriated that. And then, of course, the Muslims came along later and did the same thing with Jesus. So you have a story from like 700 years ago or so where Jesus is still wandering around the earth. He's still alive. And he comes out every day to perform these miracles on people and heal all these sick people. And people would come to him and call him a prophet of God. And he would say that he is not the true prophet, that you need to go to Muhammad. So now we have another literary appropriation where Jesus is taking his audience and sending them to Muhammad. Exactly the same thing happened with John the Baptist, taking his audience and sending them to Jesus. This is how the next religion appropriates the prior hero. So that kind of thing is going on. So we know that he wasn't, according to the Bible, Jesus was clearly not born in December. He wasn't born on, coincidentally, that point where the sun is lowest in the sky and all of that. The reason that, so many other gods have their birth date at that time is because of this, this celestial event. It's not that any of these characters actually existed, but it was also convenient for the early Christian cult that eventually developed, and then and remember that these people were based on visions. So the earliest Christians weren't talking about an actual guy that they actually knew. They were all talking about visions of this person. They treated him like he was an angelic character who spoke to him in visions and in lightning flashes and that sort of thing. And they take dreams as being cryptic visions and so forth. So I mean they're very much based entirely in imagination. And then somebody comes along and then writes it as if it's a historical story. And we know that it wasn't, because early on in the church, when the Gospels are still being composed, I mean, like the book of Luke, for example, was like hot off the press when you have Justin Martyr coming along to say that Jesus pre-existed, that the virgin birth story, not just the character of Jesus, existed older than the other gods. The virgin birth story occurred before Hercules and Dionysus and all of that. So an event that should have happened just a few decades. Justin Martyr should have known people who were old enough to have met Jesus in real life, if Jesus had actually existed. And yet Justin Martyr is saying that Jesus existed centuries before Dionysus, that Jesus is actually talked about in Psalm 19, for example. So here we have a guy in the early 2nd century who's convinced that Jesus existed 1,000 years earlier. How could that be if Jesus had only existed a few decades earlier, and that people alive then, alive in Jesus' time, who could have known Jesus, could also have still been alive when Justin Martyr came along? How can that be? So obviously, from my perspective, the only way I can interpret that is that Jesus was not a single historical character. It might have been a handful of them and a whole lot of mythical characters all kind of combined. That out of the way, we understand that the December 25th, because of the celestial configuration, was the birth date for a handful of different gods, including Mithras, as you say. And because of that, there was also a holiday that was celebrated by the Romans, which is one time that the Romans wouldn't mess with the Christian cult that had eventually emerged out of that. So, of course, they're going to have their holiday on the same day. It's the reason that everybody wants to share the same day off. So most of your atheist events are going to be on somebody's Sabbath, because that's just when most things are available, when most people are available for that, because most businesses are going to be closed. Most employees don't have to be at work at that time. So that's the best time to hold those events.
Wasn't that also due to Constantine trying to bring Christianity, and he just kind of went, well, we're going to make this holiday, we're going to take over that Saturnalia festival to with our
Yeah, the
tradition.
one thing that doesn't make sense about that was that they ruined the whole weekend with it, because the original Sabbath, and this never changed. According to the Bible, there was never a reason to change it. The Sabbath was from Friday evening to Saturday evening, and the Christians changed it to Sunday throughout the day. Why? That's not represented in Scripture at all. So where is that justified? It isn't. But what ends up happening is that the Jews own half of the stuff, the Christians own the other half of the stuff, and so you end up with a whole weekend out of it. Okay, fine, I'm not going to complain. We get Saturday and Sunday off. Good deal. But it means that somebody's going to have to be killed for working on the weekend.
But what about with Constantine introducing Christianity to the Romans? Didn't he set Christmas as being that same day that the pagans celebrated their
Well, yeah, but everybody did. That was the day that everybody's God was born. If they had a birthday at all, it was December 25th. Find a God whose birthday is known, and it's not December 25th.
I've heard some people say that it wasn't actually the Saturnalia, Yuletide, all of those. I've got the notes here. Madranit, I don't know how to pronounce that. But that they were all on not the 25th. They were earlier, the 22nd, 23rd, and certainly this year we celebrated the solstice on the 22nd, 23rd, depending on where you were on the international date line.
If you've actually got a God with a known birthday, and it's not December 25th, that's a big surprise to me, because I've never heard another date but then. And if it's December 22nd, that's amusing, because it's still the same thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, so we're still looking at what is it? The week of that it's not an equinox. What is the solstice?
Solstice, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, so that's still what they're all talking about. It's not the day that somebody was actually born. And we know, according to the Bible, that the way that they describe the conditions at that time, this is clearly not winter.
Yeah. So
we know that the Jesus character, if it was a historical character, couldn't have been born on that day. That's just a day that was later selected. And the reason that it was later selected is because the Christian cult can share the holiday with the Roman Saturnalia. And then we have later traditions where, like we have in Jeremiah 10, for example, where it warns you not to cut down the trees and put them up on the cross planks and mount them up in your house with the decorations. And initially there was the celebration of you symbolize. I mean, it was supposed to be burning a Yule log, and then the Druids and such would do the sacrifice of life, and the living sacrifice that they chose was a tree, so they would select one tree by itself and set it on fire, and that was their sacrifice. But then the Christians come in and say, hey, well, why don't you just symbolize the living sacrifice? And so they would drag the tree into the house, just like they said in Jeremiah 10, and then they would put candles in it, because that's dangerous. And they would put candles in it to symbolize that it's on fire. And then, of course, that becomes electric lights covered in tinsel and so forth with all the ornaments, because the reason they put the ornaments on it was because it wasn't just a sacrifice of life, it was also a sacrifice of wealth. So they would put all these worldly possessions, because initially the Christians were renunciate. Jesus said a rich man will not get into heaven. And the reason he's saying that is the reason that every faith healer says that today. Surrender all your money to me, and I will use it to feed the poor. And how many evangelical faith healers have we heard that story from? Like Reverend Bobby Tilton was supposed to be supporting an orphanage in Haiti that turned out not to exist. So constantly we hear this kind of a story. So Jesus is represented as this first century faith healer who's trying to take everybody's money and abscond with it himself on the promise that he will use it to feed the poor, which is really himself. And so every faith healer is still following the same course. So that they put all their wealth on their tree, and then they put up the candles, which then become electric lights to symbolize that the tree is really a sacrifice. And all of this was forbidden in Jeremiah 10. But then Christmas itself was forbidden in the early American history, because it was considered a heathen practice. Even though it was already considered by that point to be a celebration of Jesus, it was still considered sacrilege and forbidden by law initially, until we became the corporate state, the financial, or the commercial democracy or the commercial capitalist state that we are now, where it's all about the sales. And Christmas was this huge marketing thing. And so Odin becomes Santa. And Odin combined with Saint Nicholas becomes Kris Kringle.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you have all these composite characters. We know that Kris Kringle, or Saint Nicholas rather, Saint Nicholas was one of the initial characters that became Santa Claus, and so was Odin. We know both of them became Santa Claus. Same with Jesus. Jesus was a combination of different characters. That's why he has the same childhood as Moses, and Moses had the same childhood as Sargon. They're all adopting from each other. That's why when you watch the movie Independence Day, you see elements of 24 other films you've already seen. They're all combined into one movie because that's the way people tell their stories.
So how does the story of Mithra? I mean, I keep whenever I hear someone talk about this, I always hear about Mithra, and apparently there's some other ones, but Mithra always comes up. So how does Mithra tie into the Jesus mythology?
He was a mystery cult, and I don't see many resemblances beyond that. From what struck me about Mithra was that he had the stars in the sky sewn into his cloak. Now, there was a popular belief throughout the Middle East into the Orient that the Earth is a flat disk divided into 4 quadrants and covered by a giant crystal dome, which has windows in it to let the water in, because it's basically a snow globe in the middle of a vast oceanic abyss. And this popular idea throughout the Orient was that that the gods exist outside of this firmament. That's the crystal dome, is called a firmament. And so Mithras had all the stars sewn into his cloak, and he would drape his cloak over this crystal dome and stretch it out. And this is where the line from the Bible comes from, stretching out the heavens. And the similar sort of thing is in the Quran, where they talk about stretching out the heavens. Well, that's the story of Mithras stretching his cloak out over the dome, the hard crystal or like molten glass sky that the Bible describes the earth to have, and this guy can stretch a cloak over. And the funny thing about that is that the guys that made up this story knew there was no dome. They may have thought that the world was flat. They may have legitimately believed that, but they could not have believed that the world was covered by a dome that a guy covers his cloak over. They knew that wasn't true because they'd marked the motions of the planets, and that is inconsistent with the idea of somebody putting your cape over. So this is just a fairy tale that, I mean, literally that these people have made up just as a colloquial, amusing joke. They never expected that hundreds of millions of people would take this seriously in thousands of years.
Yeah, I wonder what's going to happen with the flying spaghetti monster in 2,000 years.
Yeah, it'll be an archaeological relic at that point.
So who is this Saint Nicholas?
Saint Nicholas was there was an actual character who was reputed to be part of the Nicene Convention, and the story was that there was this dispute in the 4th century where you had Atheus and Arius, I think. I'm probably getting the names wrong because I'm not remembering them clearly. But there was a dispute over whether Jesus was a created being or was he a divine being? Because for the first 300 or 400 years of Christianity, even going back to the pre-Christian character from the 1st century BC, you had these arguments that end up being arguments between the Medianites and the Docetics and the Gnostic group about whether Jesus is 100% man or is he 100% spirit who can't be a man. And so they had to reconcile this contradiction. And so what they did was that they had to they combined these two characters, and that ended up with another contradiction because in the first commandment in the Old Testament in Exodus 20, what is popularly called the first commandment is "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." But then you have Jesus saying that he is the conduit, that nobody gets to the Father but through me. So there's a contradiction with the very first commandment, and it's Jesus is it. He's presenting himself as a God before God. So the only way to reconcile that contradiction was to say that Jesus is God, that Jesus is the same character, even though Jesus never said that himself. The story of Jesus always only ever identifies himself as somebody separate from and subordinate to God, Yahweh, the Father God of the Jews, who knows things Jesus doesn't know and can do things Jesus can't do, and therefore Jesus cannot be the same guy. I mean, this is why Jesus says at one point, he says, that he is one with the Father, but then later in the same chapter, Jesus prays to God, asking God. Now, why would he do that? Why would he ask himself? He's praying to God to ask God if his disciples can also be one with God just as he is. Now, if Jesus is going to ask God if his disciples can be one with God just as he is, then clearly Jesus is not one with God in the sense that Christian believers or the Trinitarian believers say that he is.
Yeah, it's always confused me.
Yeah, so they're just trying to reconcile contradictions, and so atheists and Aron Ra has had this huge argument over whether Jesus was divinely inspired or was he divine himself, and was he the same aspect as God? Was he a physical extension like an avatar? When you play a video game, you have this avatar in the video game. That is you. You can do things your video game avatar cannot do because you exist beyond his world. And at the same time, your avatar can function in the game in a way that you cannot. And this is a good way of looking at God. Now, this was the way that Krishna in the Hindu scriptures described himself, but this is not the way Jesus described himself. So this cannot be. Jesus is not the same character as God. But there's this huge argument there that the scriptures are saying that Jesus is not God, but the interpretation of the scriptures is that Jesus is God. So you have these guys fighting over this. And the guys that were saying that Jesus was divinely inspired, but not the same essence as God, eventually lost that battle, and they were banished to the city of Medina, I believe it was. And that this was just a couple centuries before Islam arose from the same source, believing the same thing. So it seems that the people that had been banished from the Nicene Convention and went to Medina carried their ideas with them, and those ideas obviously spread, and that's where Islam comes from.
I did not know that.
So in this other aspect of the story, where you have, and I don't remember which one it was, Arius, Athanasius, and I may be pronouncing both of them wrong because I'm not looking at notes right now. I'm doing it. This whole conversation is off the fly, so I mean I could have gotten any number of things, any pronunciations and such wrong. But the guy that's arguing that Jesus is not the same essence as God, Saint Nicholas, the story is, got upset at this, and having no logical argument, punched him in the face. So what we have is literally Santa Claus saying, "Merry Christmas, here's a knuckle sandwich."
Nice.
Now, St. Nicholas was known for one thing, apart from throwing the punch in the Nicene Convention, because he doesn't have a logical way of arguing against what, the guy was supported by Scripture. He has every basis that what he's saying is correct. But, St. Nicholas still punches him anyway. The only other thing that St. Nicholas is known for is frequenting prostitutes and for offering money to support their families and so forth.
Ho, ho, ho.
Yes, exactly. And nice play on words there. I see what you did there. But so you take St. Nicholas, who is frequenting these prostitutes, and also, he's a patron in more ways than just being a customer. He's also supporting their families and so forth. And you take that with the Chinese version of I think his name is Hote. And Hote is an overweight gentleman who shows up with this bag, this ever full bag, and he has food, snacks, sweet things to eat, cakes and cookies and stuff like this, and he passes these out to all the little kids. So we can imagine what kind of guy Hote was, since he's like giving out candy to children. But let's ignore that for the moment. He's a fat, jolly guy who hands out all these goodies to kids, and you combine him with Saint Nicholas, and then you get Odin, the Norse father god. And this is where most of the Santa Claus image comes from, is actually the Norse Allfather. And he wasn't initially supposed to be giving out gifts, but there's this one tale about Odin, who shows up and gives surprises or gives benefit to the people who believe in him. So you just combine these three stories, and you've got Santa Claus. And then they have this one aspect where you have this one character who is he's being accompanied by a demon named Krampus. And the Krampus image, because you have to have the stick and the carrot.
Yep.
So what they did was that they had originally had this they had this guy, this Odin-like character shows up in all the inverted sheepskin, just dyed red sheepskin jacket. And I actually want a Santa Claus jacket made out of the actual material that his would have been made out of, the actual sheepskin, because man, that would be an excellent coat.
Yeah.
But you have this guy sneaking into people's houses to give them goodies and riches, and then Hote, he has the ever full bag full of snacks, and he's the patron of all these people, depending on how naughty or nice you are and what respect. In the case of Saint Nicholas, you combine all of these together, and then you have this bad guy character who takes the bad kids and puts them in a sack and takes them away. Well, that was too dark to sell anything, and it was also too extreme for most people to believe. This is why the first religious belief that a lot of people let go of is the concept of hell, because it's too much overkill to be believable. So the Krampus character is, again, way too unbelievable for most people. So they changed it so that if you're a bad kid, Santa still comes. He doesn't have a demon with him. It's just Santa, and instead of giving you something nice, he fills your stocking full of coal. Yep. Which, honestly, if I lived in the Middle Ages and I'm freezing to death, coal is not actually all that bad an idea if you bring me enough of it. But that I would say is the summary of where Christmas came from. And that and Coca-Cola.
Yes, the Coca-Cola Santa, which I think that story has gotten around a fair bit now. I think a lot of people understand, a lot of people know that the modern image of Santa with the red and white being the colors of Coca-Cola is why he looks the way he does now. But yeah, it's funny. One of my favorite Christmas movies is a Finnish movie that came out a few years ago called Rare Exports, which was made off a viral video, but they turned it into a full movie. And the central character of it is basically Santa Claus characterized as Krampus. So they've kind of done away with the St. Nicholas, Sinterklaas image of Santa Claus and replaced him with Krampus.
Which is an interesting thing. Let me segue into something. Anybody that's listening to your podcast may want to search this. Look under my name, Aronra, all strung together. Search Aronra and then the name Kringle. I did this little cartoon. The animation, the illustrations are my own. And I included some music from Scraping Fetus Off the Wheel, and and did this cartoon for my version of Santa, which is a lot more Odin than it is Saint Nicholas, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And it's quite a bit Krampus, but without the demon.
So that just leaves a few of the traditions: the mistletoe and the holly and the ivy.
Again, all taken from elements of pagan ritual. I mean, you had the Druidic Christmas tree, which was mentioned in Jeremiah, and then we have the Yule log, which was another, I think it was Scandinavian tradition to burn the Yule log, which was another which started as an adaptation of the living sacrifice. And I'm not sure where where all of the elements of the tradition came from, but I know they were all taken from different types of pagan celebrations of the winter, because everybody celebrates the solstice, and they do this in their own way.
Yeah. Well, the Yule is actually Germanic, so I don't know. Like, I think
is it Germanic?
Germanic, okay. Yeah. I think that covers part of Scandinavia, though. But yeah, I assume that you'd know the mistletoe, so I didn't actually write down all the notes that I had on it. So. But the holly and the ivy actually in Germanic and Scandinavian mythology was supposed to represent, they thought that it was one plant and that the holly was the male part and the ivy was the female part. And in nativity scenes, the holly, being the male, represents Jesus, the ivy represents Mary, and for some reason Joseph is completely removed from this equation.
On your reference to the mistletoe, does it have anything to do with the Nordic legend that mistletoe was the one thing that could kill Loki?
No. I think it was something to do with kissing, though. But it does actually go back to kissing. It was supposed to be some kind of love thing. But no, tell me about the Loki.
I don't know. That sounds like a Harvey Weinstein shtick to me.
But tell me about the Loki thing.
If I remember the legend correctly, and I'm sure people will correct me if I get this wrong, But I think it was mistletoe was the one thing that was capable of killing Loki, and that it was Balder. Oh, that was right. It was Balder that mistletoe was the one thing that was able to kill Balder, not Loki. So
right.
I am getting that confused.
Yep.
My wife just corrected me on that. Isn't it embarrassing that of all these mythologies, I have Nordic ancestry on both sides of my family, and yet I don't know the Norse mythology anywhere near as well as I should.
Yeah, so the holly was also this sacred plant of Saturn, so we come back to Saturnalia. And the holly wreath, the wreath kind of comes from two things. One was it was something that was used as sort of part of the Roman pagan festivals, and the Christians kind of didn't want to upset that, so they kind of went, okay, we'll keep doing that. Again, that goes back to it being the sacred plant of Saturn. But also it was the holly wreath was, the holly having the thorns was actually the crown of thorns of Jesus, which I think is slightly sadistic that this is something that we hang on our doors as a celebration of Christmas.
Yeah, well, everybody wants to wear a torture device around their neck, right?
Yeah, this is true. All right, well, you managed to cover most of the points that I had here without me even asking, so I think this was fairly productive. And I should
thank you very much.
Should probably get off because I'm like literally, I've been like occasionally, don't know if you can hear it, but I've been occasionally turning on the fan because I'm dripping sweat, and I think it's time for me to go lie down under a fan somewhere. I don't have air conditioning here.
Yeah, I was really looking forward to it. I was supposed to be at the Global Atheist Convention in early February, and unfortunately they canceled that. I was really looking forward to coming back to Australia again. So I'm sorry that it's not going to happen now, because I would really rather be there than here in February, if you know what I mean.
Well, you should come. Well, it's not in February, but you should come to Skepticon this next year. Still next year.
Where at?
Skepticon Sydney. It was in November. I think it's in sort of around that time every year. It was the 18th and 19th this year. It was a fantastic meeting of all sorts of skeptics. It wasn't just religious, but there was some religious there. There was some people who'd left religious cults, and there was a lot of debunking the woo.
Well, if your group can fund me coming out there, then I'll take advantage of that, and you and I will go out and eat some really nigh poisonous food.
I'll get working on my tolerance now. So where can people find some of your work?
Well, I blog on Patheos under Reason Advocates. Now, of course, my channel is Aron Ra, Aronra, and I don't know what else I could sell myself under. I think it's just those two.
Tree of Life?
Oh, we are doing the phylogenetic, or what is called the systematic. Let me retract. It's called the Phylogeny Explorer Project. That has yet to be unveiled, but we are working. We have a landing page. We have a discussion panel. And we're trying to unveil that by Darwin Day, which of course is mid-February. I don't know if we're going to make it because we're already a year overdue, but we're working toward that goal.
So what was the landing page? If people want to check it out and
I don't have it yet. I can't announce it because we don't have the server capacity. So if I started sending people there, first of all, it's not finished and not presentable.
Yep.
But if I were to send people there, it would overload the server.
All right. Well, I highly encourage people to check out your YouTube videos because they are very informative, and I particularly like the one you did recently on the irrefutable proof of God.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I loved doing that rebuttal because that guy, David C. Pack, that cult leader that I was countering throughout that, he was so objectionable that all I had to do was have him speak for a minute or so before I began to rebut him, and people already hated him. They were already on my side just listening to him.
Yeah. No, this is why I podcast, because of people like him and David Wolf and Ken Ham and Ray Comfort.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, thank you very much for your time today. And I hope you have a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays and all the rest. And I hope to have you back down under sometime soon.
Yeah. Happy Fargan Christmas, you bastages.
Happy Saturnalia.
All right. Good night.
Night. Okay, so because of my schedule this week, I'm actually able to issue corrections before I upload the episode. So if you'd like to see that happen more often, as in have the corrections at the end of the episode instead of the start of the next episode, get it on a Patreon and make a pledge. If I can get to my $400 an episode goal, that will definitely help to make that possible. Okay, so first off, we didn't actually get around to the X in Christmas and why that is. That's because the X is actually representative of the Greek letter chi, which is Greek representation of Christ. So it's actually supposed to be pronounced as Christ, so it is Christmas, not Xmas. I had to cut out a little bit of the discussion that Aron and I had on the electric cars, mostly because he got the names wrong in that, and I couldn't exactly validate what he was saying, but it was an interesting conversation. I think he was actually referring to the General Motors EV1, which went into production in the late 90s and was basically recalled. It was recalled due to a small problem, but when they recalled it, they basically said, we're not going to give these back, we're scrapping the program, which actually prompted Elon Musk to begin the Tesla program. But look, if anyone out there has any information on earlier electric vehicles that were commercially viable, let me know, because it's definitely something I would be interested in looking at and being able to reference. But as for now, the details on anything viable before the EV1 is kind of sketchy. I mean, there were some other electric cars available in the early 90s, but they were expensive and they didn't really give the performance that justified that cost. Now, I actually made a huge error when I reported on the Zytex lawsuit. So what I had was a motion to dismiss the case given to the US District Court. So everything in the conclusion is in regards to the motion to dismiss. So the dismissal actually was granted. I'll read it out. It was granted in part as to the plaintiff's claims for strict products liability, breach of warranties, and battery. So that was dismissed, but it was denied, meaning that it was not dismissed, as to the plaintiff's claims for intentional and negligent misrepresentation, negligence, products liability based on negligence, wrongful birth, false advertising, unfair business practices, specific performance, and punitive damages. In the order that I have here, the case wasn't decided. However, this order means that the case at the time of the order would have gone through. I don't have any details as to whether or not the case has been successful or whether it has actually occurred or not. But that is the error that I had in presenting that. If you would like to help ensure the long-term viability of this podcast, you can do so by going to patreon.com/thebunk and pledge as little as $1 an episode. You'll also get early access to each episode, the uncensored versions of the episode, and an extended version of today's episode where we talked about our misadventures with hot chilies. It was quite amusing. Once I reach the $400 an episode goal, that means that this podcast definitely gets to keep on going and I get to spend all of my time on it, which will mean a better quality podcast, and every dollar over that goal means that the quality gets to keep improving and we get to see better incentives for patrons. You can also help out by giving one-off donations at thebunk.com.au and click on the PayPal link up the top. If you'd like to help out but can't afford a donation, never fear. You can help out greatly by going to the website, thebunk.com.au, comment on episodes, give some feedback, suggest some stories, like the show on Facebook, follow on Twitter, like and share each episode on Facebook and Twitter, and that will help out greatly. That's where I'm going to leave you for today. Next week's episode will probably also be a little bit late, and then hopefully we'll be back to a normal schedule. But I definitely will have a show next week. A huge thank you to Aron Ra. Good night, day, morning, or whatever time it is where you are. I'll catch you later.